the book Better, A Surgeon's Notes on Performance by Atul Gawande. This book is a series of lessons that Dr. Gawande learned in a series of experiences he had and just the teachings that he drew from them to how he believes he became a better surgeon, and then taking those and trying to help others become better surgeons and doctors. And the biggest thing that I took from this, that I would like you to take from this, is that the dedication of doctors to improving their everyday practices of medicine is just as important as making technological advances in medicine. Determination, creativity, and the willpower to recognize and solve problems regardless of one's limitations is what makes a doctor great, not necessarily the technology that we have access to. So because Atul's book is structured as a series of lessons, I decided to structure my presentation the same, and we'll go through a couple of these lessons and why they led me to come to this conclusion, and also why I hope that by the end of this you will also agree that it is very important for a doctor to improve their everyday practices, maybe even more so than making improvements to technology. So, lesson number 1 is a rather simple lesson, but a very important lesson: washing your hands. One of the greatest struggles of modern hospitals is to minimize the spread of infection. A large part of that issue is that hospital staff are often too lax about washing their hands, as pulled from the book. Instead, their greatest difficulty is getting clinicians like me to do the one thing that consistently halts the spread of infections: wash our hands. So in this lesson, Atul was talking about how he's going around the hospital that he was working in with staff microbiologists. And their job for this hospital was to minimize the amount of infection, the amount of viruses, and specifically the amount of bacteria outbreaks there are in this hospital. And what they were telling him is that the hardest thing for them to control is doctors washing their hands. Because it's a very easy and simple step for the doctors to forget. It's kind of going into a patient's room, you're supposed to wash your hands. Leaving the patient's room, you're supposed to wash your hands. And this constant process of wash, go in, wash, leave, wash, go in, wash, leave. It becomes very tedious, and by the end of the day, or after a period of time, many doctors actually will just completely stop doing that step on its own. The problem, though, is that staph infections and generally bacterial infections can be one of the biggest reasons for death in hospitals. So since the discovery of microorganisms, the invention of antibacterial soaps, sanitizers, and ventilation systems have been incorporated into hospitals. However, all these things are ineffective if people do not actively use them. The simple act of washing one's hands can help prevent needless death in hospitals and improve the overall care of patients. So this very simple act, this very everyday act, can be, in the long run, hugely critical to the care that patients receive. The next lesson that I thought was very interesting from this book was treating battlefield injuries. Battlefield medical staff are tasked with treating gruesome injuries with minimal medical supplies and often in unstable conditions. Despite this, battlefield deaths have dropped significantly since the Revolutionary War. This is because battlefield doctors do what we in civilian medicine do spottily at best: to make a science of performance, to investigate and improve how well they use the knowledge and the technologies they already have at hand. So when you are a battlefield doctor or a battlefield surgeon, you don't have access to all this fancy supplies and equipment that a hospital would have. But you are faced with injuries that are often way more gruesome than the average surgeon or average doctor would see on a daily basis. And battlefield technicians and battlefield medical staff have had to find ways around the issue of, I have worse injuries but less supplies. And that mainly has come through making, as Atul states, a science of performance and maximizing the tools that you have at hand, maximizing your systems and the people around you, and maximizing the small things that you do along the way in order to save your patients. My next lesson is the bell curve and cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is a devastating genetic disorder that causes damage to the lungs and digestive system. One of its primary effects is that the lungs fill with a thick mucus that makes it difficult to breathe. In his book, Gawande investigates different cystic fibrosis treatment centers and why some are more successful than others. As he investigates, the head doctor of the leading cystic fibrosis treatment center Gawande notes that he and his colleagues aren't content if their patient's lung function is 80% normal or even 90%. They aim for 100% or better. So this right here is an example of determination and of like not being satisfied with the best we can do, or not being satisfied with this is the best you can accept. The people at this CF treatment center strive for the absolute best and do everything within their power to achieve the absolute best. The CF patients don't get better due to the technology, they get better with the treatments they receive from their doctors improves. The leading CF treatment center is leading because doctors refuse to accept anything less than 100% lung function. From rigid medication regimes, cough therapies, and one-on-one work with their patients, these doctors will do anything within their power to ensure the long and sustainable lives of their patients. Okay, lesson number 4, and if I remember correctly, I think this is my last lesson, and this was also my favorite lesson, and it's the miraculous work of doctors in India. So during his time in residency, Gawande elected to work in some hospitals in India. What he observed while there was severely underfunded hospitals that lacked adequate medical equipment, space, and sanitization systems. Despite this, the medical personnel that worked in these hospitals were highly skilled and could treat a countless range of ailments with very limited tools. This is because they approached each person's ailment with a readiness to recognize problems and a determination to remedy them. Something else that Atul described that I really liked was that all these doctors had a huge range of skills, ranging from being able to perform cardiac surgeries to being able to perform the skills of a urologist, simply because they had to. They didn't have the personnel, they didn't have these specialized, people available. If you were a doctor in one of these hospitals, you had to be able to do everything. And this is an example of how the circumstances they were in forced them to be able to do this, but it also makes them very, very skilled and very, very versatile and very good doctors who can work within the boundaries of the system that they're in. Some counter arguments that I expect the people to have. So one would be technological advancement of medical devices is more important than doctors' performance. It's unrealistic to expect medical staff who are already overworked and exhausted to have the determination to make improvements to their personal practices. And the examples given are of rare and exceptional individuals, but isn't possible for all doctors. And my counter arguments to these counter statements are, first of all, neither is more important than the other, both are valuable. Don't get me wrong, in this presentation, I believe that technology and advancing technology is very important. However, the improvement of doctors on an individual level can be more obtainable for medical practices that may not be able to afford new tech. This is furthered by Gawande's experience with the doctors in India, where they could only aid their patients by improving themselves and their skill sets. They could not use technology as a fallback simply because it was not available to them. Being able to be adaptable, being able to be flexible, and willing to improve yourself in the other day makes a doctor more versatile in any situation that they may be in, thus making them better and more effective at what they do. Personal improvements can be as simple as being more cognizant about washing one's hands or being more creative about how one assigns treatments. It doesn't always mean learning new surgical skills. It's about improving how one goes about their day-to-day practices. A general surgeon doesn't need necessarily to learn how to do the job of a cardiac surgeon. But if a general surgeon makes it an everyday practice to wash their hands, that in itself will improve the care and the results that their patients experience. The observations, improvements, and dedication of becoming the best possible doctor that one can be is very obtainable for anyone. It's a matter of self-discipline and the will to do so. The doctors on the battlefield are often ordinary clinicians that volunteer to be battlefield doctors. They aren't specially trained for the position, and they aren't necessarily geniuses. They are just doctors who are forced to work under certain conditions and thus need to find obtainable ways to improve how they do so. The book Better by Atul Gawande taught me that the dedication of doctors to improving their everyday practices of medicine is just as important as making technological advances in medicine. This can be done with a mix of determination, creativity, and the willpower to recognize and solve problems regardless of one's limitations. While technology is a useful and valuable factor in being a doctor, simply improving the way one practices medicine in the day-to-day can be more impactful for patients in the long run. Supporting statements are, there are countless doctors across the world working in conditions in which they don't have access to the best and newest tech. Regardless if they are on a battlefield or a third world country, these doctors need to find ways to effectively treat their patients with only the tools and skills they have on hand. They do this through stringent observation, determination, and the self-discipline to change their day-to-day approaches to medicine. Even when doctors do have access to the most advanced technology, improving day-to-day treatment of patients will help improve the overall quality of care patients receive. The simple act of washing hands between each patient can prevent deadly infection. The creativity behind coming up with new CF treatments that allow patients to have 100% lung capacity makes a difference between the top and the average CF treatment centers. Final summary. Doctors bear unbelievable amounts of responsibility. Their success often goes unnoticed, and their failures can be devastating. The things that make a good doctor are much debated, but I believe that one of the key factors is the ability to recognize the way in which one needs to improve and to make those improvements. The ways in which medical personnel improve their personal daily practices do not need to be huge. They just need to be intentional. More often than not, technology becomes our fallback response to how we make patient care better. But the work of the people in hospitals will always be more impactful to a patient. Okay, here are some questions that I suspect people might have. What are some other ways you would say doctors could improve their practices? And based on the book, I would say small things like not complaining about the difficulties of being a doctor, aka having a positive mindset overall, and trying to intentionally listen to patients and work with them on a personal level to resolve their ailments are very important to how doctors can improve their practices. And this isn't to say that being a doctor is easy or that, a doctor should never have complaints. It's just having an overall positive mindset about the circumstances affects how you behave and it will affect how your patients feel. And another question is, do you think the personal improvements of doctors are more important than technological improvements? No, I think that both are equally important and valuable. However, I think that the personal improvements of doctors are often more obtainable and will matter more to a patient. And here's my reference. Thank you so much for your time and thank you for listening. Have a good day.